Hi everyone, so today's video is going to be pretty chill. I thought it'd be fun for me to read excerpts of the writing that I've written recently that I really like. So this video is only going to include my personal projects. I can't read excerpts for my short stories because some magazines might consider that previously published. So you'll just have to read my short stories elsewhere. But I haven't read my work kind of in a more casual setting in a while on this channel, and I thought it would be fun. And here's the reason why. So if you didn't know, I'm an undergraduate student getting my writing degree. So I've been pursuing my Bachelor of Arts in Creative Writing for a number of years now. I love being a writing major for many reasons. There are also some drawbacks that might be a little bit unexpected. And the main one is that as a writing major, I don't really get to write what I want. I have to basically be writing for the 8 months of school. So across 2 semesters, writing that is school focused. So that's going to be a lot of my short stories. It's going to be a lot of polishing. It's not necessarily going to just be exploration for the fun of writing. And that's because these are also assignments when you're a writing major. And honestly, I was feeling pretty emo about it. I was thinking about how it's been almost 2 years since I started my novel Feeding Habits, which I'll get into, and I'll give summaries for what I'm going to read so that you are aware if you haven't been following the channel for some time. I started that book when I was 18 and now I'm 20, and it's just crazy how time goes by and I haven't worked on it since June. And then I was thinking about Seventh Virtue, which is my fantasy spin-off, which is related to Feeding Habits, which I will also explain, and how I haven't worked on it in almost a year. I started it in May last year, and I thought it was only going to take me 4 months. And, while I wrote a lot of it, I haven't written basically any of it since August. And it was making me a little bit sad. So I thought I'd make a little bit of a self-indulgent video. With that said, these are early drafts of manuscripts. They've been edited a couple of times. So please be gentle with me. If you hate my writing, that's okay. Just maybe don't tell me because I'm sensitive right now. So the first excerpts that I'm going to be reading for you are from my novel, Feeding Habits. So Feeding Habits is a bit of a complicated project to explain. If you're new to my channel, I have been writing this series called Fostered for a very long time. I'm 20 years old. I'm turning 21 very soon in September, actually. I started the project just a couple days after I turned 13. So, Fostered has been here with me for a very, very long time. In my teenage years, I wrote the main series books, which are books 1 to 6, and they follow a character named Reeve who will appear in some of the excerpts. And so a lot of the series was dedicated to her. By the time I got into my last year of high school, early university, I kind of wanted a change, and I decided to write a spin-off series called the Mothwork series. So it's 2 books, Mothwork and Feeding Habits, and they follow Harrison and Lonan. Lonan is Reeves, who is the narrator of the main series. That's her brother, and it follows him and his, so I guess they're not really together, but anyway, his boyfriend, sort of, Harrison, and their tumultuous on and off relationship. So that's Feeding Habits. I'm also going to be reading from a book called Seventh Virtue. I think it'll just be easier for me to lump Seventh Virtue's explanation here, so I'm just going to put it here. Seventh Virtue is essentially the adult fantasy version of Feeding Habits. Books 1 to 6 of Fostered. The main series range in genre and age category. The first, let's say, 3 books are young adult dystopian. Books 4 to 6 are just really confused. They don't know what they are. Mothwork from the spin-off series Mothwork is kind of just like contemporary fiction. And then Feeding Habits, I would say, is adult literary fiction. So yeah, lots of different genres, lots of complexities, but all you need to know for Feeding Habits is that it's literary fiction. So here's the summary of Feeding Habits. It's a little bit rusty and old, but anyway, enjoy it. Lonan isn't sleeping. He hasn't slept since the phone call started, only on Fridays, only in the afternoons, only in a code he and the caller understand. Navigating the remnants of a destructive romance, he finds solace in supporting the caller who is in a similar situation. But as both Lonan and the caller find themselves more and more in a situation of prey versus predator, he chooses to leave what has been familiar to help not only himself but the caller and the child she appears to be caring for. Harrison isn't happy, settled into his new life in New York City with his mother Susanna. Things should be exciting, vivid, glamorous, but life in the city is duller than he projected. Unable to hold down a job or make friends beyond a litter of stray kittens, he concludes his restart will only ever be disappointing. As he cycles through the bland circuit of his new life, an inevitable truth is revealed. Though Harrison doesn't want to admit it, he knows what's missing and must decide whether or not he's willing to go and find him. That is Feeding Habits, and I'm going to be reading from, I think it's chapter 9. This is actually the most recent chapter I wrote, and essentially how I came about writing it is I had started writing chapter 10, which I think is the final chapter in the book, and that's in Lonan's point of view. I'm going to be reading from Harrison's point of view because I realized that I needed another point of view chapter in Harrison's head, so I jumped back in time, and this is what I wrote back in June, and this chapter, which is called Initial Condition, holds a really special place in my heart. I'm just really happy with it. I'm happy with how the themes turned out, and I was working on sort of like a circular story structure where there's a theme at the center and every single event revolves around the theme. But anyway, so this is the opening of chapter 9. The chapter basically follows Harrison and Lonan, who have met up for the first time in a year. They haven't seen each other. Their relationship is kind of awkward. It's a little strange. They're like strangers who know each other really well. And Harrison, who lives with his mother, Susanna, is being basically forced to go on a road trip with Lonan by his mom because she's not taking their shit anymore. She wants them to basically figure out their nonsense and then come back home. So this is the first excerpt, which basically covers that. Trust looks like a road trip to Buffalo. This is not Harrison's idea, nor is it Lonan's. It's all Sue's. When Harrison eventually comes inside, staticky from the car, ready to flee, and his mother cooks everyone dinner, and they all eat it around the kitchen table like some makeshift family, and she serves dessert, her first attempt at baklava, and she cries briefly in her bedroom and exits okay, and gathers both her son and Lonan in front of the television. She informs them they must communicate, hands them both envelopes. Inside, a handwritten note. Tasks: harvest rhubarb for Suze. See a movie, drive somewhere, sleep well. So that's a bit of an intro excerpt to this chapter, and here's a fun description that I really like. Tonight, the sky is blackberry bruised, pinched with stars and streetlights. On side streets, they've made it all the way to Poughkeepsie. Technically, this is somewhere. Harrison could take a power nap, pick up some rhubarb at the supermarket, lie about seeing a movie, and then go home. Susanna's desires fulfilled, his and Lonan's relationship repaired. It could be that easy. And here's a description of some teenage girls that I think is cool, and I wish I was a teenage girl again, because this made me nostalgic. Lonan slows at a crosswalk. A group of teenage girls whisk by in glitter and lip gloss. They look so normal. They are so normal. Harrison can't even remember what day of the week it is. It could be Friday, it could be Tuesday, but these girls are so normal. Absolutely fine. The worst thing happening in their lives, an algebra test on Monday or Thursday, depending on what day it currently is. They'll go home and tar each other with butterfly temporary tattoos, rip at their eyebrows with tweezers, join hands atop a DIY Ouija board, and be unable to sleep until the next day. So normal. And here's an excerpt, content warning. This deals with Harrison's ailing mental health. His mom kind of reverts to religion, and she's not religious at all, in sort of desperation. Susanna does not believe in God, but after her son failed to rebound back into the clean elastic he once was, she gathered whatever friends she had. Friends is a strong word. They were mostly acquaintances from the building, people she met while drying her clothes at the laundromat, or buying rounds of Avora cheese at the supermarket, and started a prayer circle. Harrison lay in the middle of his bed, staring somewhere between the ceiling and Mars. To you do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. To you do we send up our sighs, mourning and weeping in this valley of tears, they said, heads bowed stiffly, as if hiding from one another. And this excerpt is, I think, the final one, from Feeding Habits, and is quite a nice hypothetical memory that Harrison has hoped to have with his mom. He doesn't have with her. He didn't have a great childhood with his mother. It was quite turbulent. And this chapter deals with him trying to unpack his relationship with his mom, which is the reason why I added it, because I felt like Feeding Habits was missing that. So this is actually kind of a sweet moment despite it not actually existing, which kind of makes it bittersweet in a sense. In this memory, Harrison and Susanna are at a public park, child and mother. It has no name. In the center, arced by trees, is a swing set, and he clutches its rocking chain as she nudges him forward and back. Sun flares against the clouds near sunset and pinkens them. She is humming a song, and he is humming back. It has no particular melody, and that is not important. What matters is that they both know it. Her fingernails are pegged with butter and sugar from a day baking pastéis de nata, easy like butterfly wings against his shoulders as he goes forward and back, forward and back, forward and back. It's kind of sweet. It's really sweet, I think. So the next project that I'm going to be reading from is not sweet. It's quite chaotic. Seventh Virtue, like I explained, is essentially the adult fantasy version of Feeding Habits. The characters are older in this version. It's slightly different, but really it's still about Harrison's relationship with Lona, and it's tumultuous. What I like about Seventh Virtue particularly is that it brings a lot of the elements of the main series that I wrote when I was a very young teenager back into the books. And those are something that I just found the most exciting. Those scenes just were so fun to just have just pure chaos and fun on the page. Back when I was a teenager, that was bliss. I remember once I wrote 12,000 words in like a weekend. It was like 2 days on a trip to New York City with my family. All I was writing was Fostered. I was writing my characters in New York City while I was there. And I thought that was kind of a sweet experience, kind of me experiencing their experiences by proxy and vice versa. These characters meant a lot to me when I was a teenager, and to be able to write them doing similar things to what they were doing when they were teenagers, because we've all aged together. I was 13 when I started writing them. The youngest, who was the narrator, was 15, and now she's 24 and I'm 20. So it's kind of like, oh, it's a whole thing. It makes me really happy. But essentially, this project brings some of the genre elements. It brings some of the chaos of the friendship arcs and the banter that I kind of miss from the main series. I lost that a little bit when I was like in my late teens. I kind of had this rolling obsession with literary fiction and making everything super literary. And while I love literary fiction, and I still write tons of literary fiction, like literary short fiction, I found that stripping the genre away from Fostered didn't bring me joy anymore. And last year, I just wanted a project that was going to hype me up, because writing Feeding Habits has been miserable. No offense to Feeding Habits. And this project has just been so fun. It's been exactly what I needed. And I'm so happy that I'm back to writing genre fiction, since I wrote so much genre fiction when I first started writing, which might be surprising to a lot of you, because obviously I wasn't vlogging back then all that much. I think I started my YouTube channel when I was 15, and by the time I was 15 and 16, I was really writing a lot of literary fiction, 16 especially. So here's the summary of Seventh Virtue. After being tormented by nightmares of his ex-boyfriend, Lonan, Harrison seeks a magical intervention from old friend Reeve, but when she reveals she and Lonan are members of the Seventh Roost, one of 7 magical families that coincide with the 7 virtues and 7 capital sins, she also unveils another secret. Lonan is part virtue, the immortal bird that represents each house, and her family is holding him captive in hopes of extrapolating his power. Harrison must choose to continue life as he knows it, or rekindle relationships he thought he'd left behind to save someone he once loved. Which basically sounds like the Feeding Habits premise. Here is an excerpt that is actually quite literary, despite everything I just said about genre. It's actually quite literary, because I love just being like a chaotic literary writer sometimes in these excerpts. And then on the flip side, I can be like very not literary. I like doing both. And this is like kind of like a dream sequence, kind of. Essentially what happens is Harrison is asleep, and when he sleeps, he sometimes has these strange visions of Lonan, and this happens to be one of them, and he's not happy about it. So, in the belly of the lake, no one leaves. Look there. Are they netted, the bodies? Are they familiar? Or are they recognizable a better question? Think carefully. 3 of them tangled in that reflective pit. Who are they? Drowning. Don't blink when, in an instant, none of this, the lake, the bodies, are there. When all there is in sight is a bird heaving in the center of a concrete room. Approach him. Know him, and quickly, his black feathers so slick they gloss indigo in the single floodlight lighting him. Notice he's injured. Notice he has hands, fingers, that he holds something small, polished. Notice the blood, how it gels everything, his skin, feathers, the floor. Notice how he holds it all, the knife, the blood, his skin, the feathers, the floor. Actually, I realized that that's probably more the poet in me coming out. Yeah, that's totally a poem. That's such a good excerpt. I really like that. The repetition at the end. Okay, Rachel, I wrote that a couple of months ago, I think. Yeah, notice how he holds it all. The knife, the blood, his skin, the feathers, the floor. That's awesome. Awesome. So the next excerpt is, I think I was talking about this on a live stream. I might have been writing this on a live, but Harrison gets injured like shortly after this nightmare thing happens. And this is kind of a description of a road trip. Reeve, who is his sort of ex-best friend, they're in a precarious spot right now because the breakup with London was delicious and she's very close with her brother. They have sort of reunited. Harrison has gone with her and Foster, who is Harrison's roommate and best friend, to go get some help in tracking down Lonan because they have no idea where he is. So this is that excerpt. They stop for lunch at a local-owned burger joint called Flip 'em. Foster squints at the drive-thru menu, having a back and forth with the employee who desperately tries to help him veganize a meal. The place's motto is best beef, big beef. Foster lands with tomatoes and lettuce between two buns and orders 2 sets of sliders for Harrison and Reeve. And though Harrison tries a nibble of patty here, a sip of Coke there, the food is like concrete in his throat. All three pretend not to notice that he barely makes it through one mini burger. It rains once mid-afternoon hits, the sky a fuzzed gray. Harrison dozes to the sound of droplets spattering against the window and dreams of hands. The next excerpt from Seventh Virtue is actually a head hop into Reeve's point of view because I don't give a crap when I'm writing this book. I do what I want. I do what makes me happy. And head hopping into Reeve's point of view periodically is what makes me happy when I'm writing Seventh Virtue because I missed writing in her head. So this is a bit of Reeve being a bit chaotic after she parties a little bit too hard after meeting up with her ex who got engaged and she did not know. And then she ended up stumbling at his engagement party and had no idea. So if Reeve gets up and leaves or is kicked out, she'll never remember. One moment she retches and the next she stumbles through damp grass wearing Celia's dress. Is she a thief? She might be. She loves it. She's barefoot, slinging mud behind her. She loves it. She's hunting for road on her knees. She loves it. She's laughing in the headlights like a gassed stag. And the next excerpt is Reeve rifling through her ex's bedroom because she's snooping and drunk. She doesn't sleep. She snoops, of course. Though she can hardly tell up from down or left from right. After he's been gone at least 5 minutes, she gets off the bed and pulls open drawers. In the night table's top drawer, a Bible, lip balm. In the bottom, phone cords, computer cords, all sorts of cords clotted like funnel cake. In the small closet on the left side of the room, white t-shirts, cargo pants, navy blazers, navy hoodies. In the small closet on the right side of the room, chiffon blouses, denim cutoffs, midi skirts, photo albums, letters, broken pens, a novel with no cover, a lilac pillar candle, fabric scissors. So the next excerpt from Seventh Virtue is Harrison after a bit of a confrontation. It actually reminds me a lot of if Harrison was Lonan in Feeding Habits, because Lonan stands in the woods a lot, doing nothing and just staring in the dark. And that's what this excerpt is. Harrison opens his eyes and he's in the woods. He stands ankle deep in a running brook. Evergreens pleat the sky like arrows. The next excerpt is also Harrison. Now he stands once again in the water. Just as his mother taught him, he submerges his arm and waits. Moonlight winking from fading sun, crickets beginning to chirp. He tries to fish for what feels like a half hour. The sun so far gone that all that's left of it is a periwinkle wash of sky. And the last excerpt from Seventh Virtue is going to be back in Reeve's head because, like I told you, I head hop with reckless abandon in this book. In Reeve's dream, she is dancing, arms in the air. Thrift store bracelets jangle on her wrist in acrylic orchestra. She licks peach lip gloss off her teeth between moves. Under her apartment's chandelier, she shimmers in cyan, violet, lemon. Over the radio, Madonna. Reeve pumps her fist to like a virgin and mimes the words to her reflection in the dishware hutch. She pirouettes in front of the sink to Holiday and belts the chorus lying back first on the kitchen table. So the next project that I want to read from is called Houses with Teeth. So Houses with Teeth, I totally forgot to mention in the fostered section, is another complicated part of the fostered series. Essentially, Houses with Teeth was supposed to be book 7 of the main series. I told you there's books 1 to 6. Houses with Teeth never happened. It freaked me out because at that point I had wanted to transition into writing solely literary fiction, but I felt kind of uncomfortable having to remold the entire series, kind of reintroduce these characters, get them reacclimated to each other in a new genre. Because of that, I freaked myself out and I never wrote it. I actually ended up writing Feeding Habits because I was so afraid and I procrastinated the crap out of it that I decided to write a new book that's taken me 2 years to write. Yeah, I know. I needed to write a novel opening for a class. I ended up not finishing it because I ended up writing a different novel opening, which I'm going to read a couple excerpts from. But for Houses with Teeth, I had written like about 1,000 words of it, and I wanted to read a couple of the excerpts because this is like the 3rd time I've started this particular book, and I'm really happy with it. I hope that I can write it one day. There isn't really a summary for this book. It's essentially follows Reeve. She's in her early 20s after escaping an abusive relationship, and the time she spends at a remote cabin that once belonged to her mother up in the woods. So yeah, it's quite a quiet book. It really will only be her in it. So in this version, I changed her name. It's not Reeve. I called her Eve and then Evelyn, but when I write it, I think I'll actually call her Reeve. I just didn't want to call her Reeve for some... Anyway, and also her actual mother's name in the real canon series is named Izzy. In this version, her name I think is Joan. I might change those things, or I might keep them if I end up writing this book. So here's the opening. I told myself I went to the cabin to think. It belonged to my mother, Joan. In the early 60s, her father had built it from reclaimed fur with a few gambling friends. Together, they spent summers reeling silvery minnow from the freshwater lake that backed the house, baked blueberry strudel from the bushes that hemmed the tree line. I learned these things from the photos she'd tucked into the slim red album I thumbed through as a child. Most of the pages were blank, images sparsely peppered at random intervals. My mother, possibly 10, frowning in front of a collapsed mud castle. At 3, her small legs dangling off the dock her father had fitted out of an old beach chair. A young teenager with her toes in the water. Grains of sand freckling her pale skin. As my sedan heaved up the hilly driveway, I promised myself I'd do these things too. Recreate whatever semblance of summer glitz she and my grandfather had orchestrated, because my head spun less that way. An inhale of the remnants of my sour panic, and I imagined myself elbow-deep in all-purpose flour, grinning in the distance as if someone were taking a point-and-shoot picture of me. A clutch of my raw hands around the steering wheel, and I imagined sitting naked in the sun for an hour, then heading into the house and slathering aloe all up my raw stomach and wrists. The potentials were a blissful distraction. If I were here on vacation, a little getaway, a little weekend trip, I could avoid staring myself in the mirror and yelling at a woman I didn't recognize. Or at least I believed so. The time on my car, which had been pushed to wheezing and rattling through the 20-hour drive, had started to rapidly blink halfway through the trip. I parked in a pit of gravel and felt my chest sink into the shifty rocks with the car. In the rear view, I caught sight of a bewildered woman with a bad haircut. A press of a palm across my forehead, and I was hacking a dull nail clipper through the strands until bangs formed. Another across my mouth, and my face nearly disappeared. Outside, sunlight webbed evergreen trees and dusted the roof of the cabin. Through the dash, I spotted the window, now broken, which opened to a view of the driveway. Glass particles glittered. It had likely been broken years before by an animal. I exited the car. I started my new life by clearing glass from the windowsill. With my coat sleeve pulled over my hand, I combed what remained into the now-dead garden. Hyacinths might have been there once. Dandelions, marigolds. My flip-flops sunk into the wet earth, the only shoes I'd had time to snag on my way out of his apartment. They were aqua-colored. A palm leaf peeked out from beneath my big toe. Joel had bought them for me at a department store super sale. I made a mental note to walk into town, 45 minutes by foot, to replace them as soon as possible. When I'd cleared most of the glass, I leveraged my weight onto the windowsill and poked my head through the now barren frame. The cabin smelled most relevantly of dust. The one and only time Joan had brought me here, she disguised the must under a tonic of vanilla extract and orange rinds boiled on the stovetop. I pushed farther across the windowsill till I hit my collarbone, moved through the window until I was far in enough to snatch the neck of the floor lamp and haul myself all the way through. I landed on the hardwood in a sigh of thin dust. No one had been in the cabin for a long time. The last time Joan had visited was nearly 15 years ago for a vague family reunion with her older sister and brother. She'd hauled me along because my babysitter, our 16-year-old neighbor named Petal, who enjoyed throwing dice at me when we played Monopoly, bailed. I was 10. I sat at the breakfast alcove when Joan got the call from Petal's mother. My mother paced in front of the table, tutting her tongue into the landline. Petal gave me her word that she'd look after Evelyn, she said, in between smoking a cigarette and gnawing on a crimson-chipped fingernail. I stared out that same window to Petal's house across the street, a duplex that was decorated for Christmas year-round. A lighted angel statue had been knocked over, likely from the thunderstorm the night previous. On the phone, my mother scoffed. Sure, plans change, but this is about responsibility, Mandy. Then shortly after, sure, my daughter is my responsibility, but your daughter made a promise. She hung up, tossed the phone onto the tile. Its back clattered off, skittered under my chair. Joan gnawed her lip, then globbed loose dribbles of pancake syrup off my plate and stuck her finger into her mouth. She took another puff of her cigarette. After a moment, she looked at me. I couldn't tell if she was angry or disgusted I was there. She licked her thumb, then leaned closer to me. Carefully, as if restoring fine art, she smudged syrup from my mouth. Pack your bag, baby. Now, pieces of that visit still decorated the space. A red Solo cup knocked on its side in front of the TV stand, a clog-shaped ashtray crusted with cigarette butts. From the floor, the entire cabin was visible. A cramped box except for an L-shaped alcove leading to the bathroom. The living space absorbed the bedroom, which absorbed the kitchen. That was it. Joel's entire apartment was somehow larger, which meant the cabin was perfect. I yearned more than anything for confinement. If you couldn't tell from the prose, that's adult literary fiction. The final excerpts in this video are going to be from my adult lit fic book called The Sun Only Drowns Us. This is a novel that I've been working on since 2020. Originally, I had wanted to write Houses with Teeth in first year. It freaked me out. So then I moved on to Sun Only Drowns Us, and it freaked me out. And then I wrote Feeding Habits the night I couldn't write this book anymore. So I credit this book for giving me Feeding Habits, which gave me Seventh Virtue, which brings me so much joy. Anyway, so this is the summary of that book, which I recently handed in the first chapter to my workshop. So some of these excerpts are going to be revised, I can assume. In the summer, the sun turns poisonous. 15-year-old Eva commits to living off the grid with her neighbor, Lillian Rodacchia, and Lillian's children, Charlie, Vera, and Jack. Lillian is convinced the sun is an evil force that drives people to their ultimate deaths, so to protect herself and her family, she swaps her bustling life in a small British Columbia town for a secluded life on a desolate island. They settle at a remote cabin where they only live at night, which Eva is thrilled about at first, having come from an emotionally absent household, though she quickly realizes something is not right when Lillian's only daughter, Vera, turns up dead shortly after her 16th birthday. Coupled with Lillian's increasingly peculiar relationship with eldest son Charlie, Eva's new life as an honorary Rodacchia child begins having more consequences than benefits. Here's the opening of the novel. This is from the prologue. The boat sank in the river the night we buried Vera. Charlie explained this to me first, throwing a loose fist of dirt into the shallow grave he and his mother, Lillian, had dug. It was an accident, he said. It happens, he said. Sometimes boats just do that. Our only way to get home gone and already one of us dead. They found Vera floating on her back and dragged her up the shore, closer to the cabin. A clamshell wedged into her mouth, tangled with strands of kelp, and stretched her lips into a smile. And this is a description of Eva watching Charlie. I mostly watched Charlie. He wore his oilskin coat, though the July summer was at its hottest that day. He had been gone most of the day, the smell of sun still blistering his back. The worn fabric tautened as he hunched to Jack's height, the flaking bits that he'd later superglued down caught in remnants of sun. In the light, his hair whitened. I knew which places of his scalp would be warm if I latticed my fingers across. And this is an excerpt of when Eva meets Charlie for the first time. I'd met Charlie first, right when Judith and I moved in. The nip of my new braces still scored my gums. My mother had moved us under the pretense of starting a new job that didn't exist. Back then, a vague exhaustion permanently softened her eyes. Before we moved, she'd prop onto our old apartment's couch, barefoot in a pantsuit, and stare at the wall until the next day. My mother was a haunted woman. She told me little of my father, who'd been out of the picture since I was born. Her life was her own, with the added responsibility of me. Charlie sat on the front porch, fiddling with something I couldn't see. He was 22 then. I hadn't meant to be watching him. Judith rucked suitcases out of the car as I stood on our new house's veranda, my figureless body swallowed by the t-shirt I'd traveled in. My mother didn't ask for help, and it wasn't that I didn't want to. It was that I'd forgotten where I was because of him. Something about his focus, a delicacy I'd never noticed in people until then. I was intrigued. Judith rolled the suitcases up the driveway, then up the entry steps and into our new house without once glancing at me, like she was a spirit and had forgotten to play her part as a human. I kicked off the veranda and walked closer to him, pretended to examine the foliage rooted in a column down the driveway. I did not want him to notice me, so absently fluttered my hands over the petals of the few flowers not scorched to death in the heat, my fingers suddenly too childish in comparison to the unknown boys across the street. His careful grip looked like it was carved inch by inch out of soapstone. And I think I'm just going to leave the video off on that note because my SD card has 3 minutes and I have been reading for almost an hour straight. I hope this video was enjoyable for you. If you'd like to see more videos like this, let me know. I just felt like I really needed to make a video like this to feel kind of hyped about my work that I often don't get to connect with when I'm in school just because I'm so busy. So this was quite lovely. So thank you for joining me. What have you been writing that you really like? Let me know in the comments below. But for now, thank you so much for watching and I will see you in another video. Bye.